are going to finish this wonderful, wonderful conference with the topic of creativity. Now, why would we use creativity at a conference about credit industry? Well, I've been studying this topic of creativity for over 25 years, and I've asked over 1 million people, what is their approach to creativity? And maybe I should compare it to you. I will use you as my test audience. I will ask only you, and I will compare the answers from you with the over 1 million people that I've asked. So let's start. I asked people, is creativity important in your job? Let's see. Raise your hand, this group only. Is creativity important in your job? Yes or no? Yes, very good. Second question, do you think you are creative? This group, do you think you are creative? Okay, and last question. This group, do you think that your organization is doing enough to develop the creativity of your employees? Doing enough? No one. So let's see how people react. As I said, over 1 million people, all kinds of industries, over 75 countries, young and old, CEOs and taxi drivers. This is how people react. First question, is creativity important in your job? Yes. Everyone says yes. Even accountants say yes. But then we have the second question, do you think you are creative? Here it was about 55%. Normally in Mexico it will be more, it will be usually like 80%. But the global average is just 45%. I'm from Sweden. In Sweden it's just 60%. I've been living in Asia for the last 17 years. In Singapore it's just 20%. In Japan it's less than 20%. And in South Korea it's less than 5%. Of course, the number one country is America. Every American thinks they are creative. Then we have the third question. Do you think your company is doing the activity of its employees? Are we doing enough? And no one says yes. 2 people say yes. HR manager and person sitting next to HR manager. And this is why I do what I do. Because everyone will say, creativity is important in my job. Most people will say, it's a very important skill, but I don't have it. And everyone will say, we're not doing enough to develop the creativity of our employees. But imagine if we did. So I have dedicated my life over the last 25 plus years to study human creativity. I go to between 25 and 35 countries every year. I interview everything from artists to CEOs. I've done hundreds and hundreds of CXOs interviews in all industries, from cement to banking. But I also go and interview people who never get interviewed about creativity. I went to Mongolia and interviewed the nomadic people in the desert of Mongolia. What can we learn about creativity from them? I went to North Korea. What can we learn about creativity from the North Koreans? And I normally never share this, but today with you I'm going to share you what I learned about creativity from the North Koreans. Basically today, I will take you on a journey. I'm the Creativity Explorer, and we are going to go on a journey to discover more about our own creative potential. We'll start with what I learned, a few lessons from the fintech industry or financial industry, and then we go broader, and we end up in North Korea. So, as I said, I've been doing it for over 25 years. I started in 1995, and the financial institutions have always been my client. You might not think so because you think financial institutions should not be creative, but of course it's not true. They always ask for creativity. They want to innovate. In the 1995 to 2000, it was a big focus on innovation. Here came the internet, and suddenly money became digital, and we had all these new products that we could develop. It was a wonderful time. Then the bubble burst. And between 2000 and 2005, the financial industry was a bit cautious, didn't really figure out what to do with innovation. Then we realized that internet was here to stay, and creativity took off, and we got all these mobile banking services and all the innovation in the financial industry. And then boom, 2008 we got the financial crisis. And for 2 years, not a single financial institution wanted to hear about creativity. They said we were way too creative, and look what happened. Then to 2010 to 2015, the focus was on change, mostly regulatory change, not so much innovation. But then came the fintech revolution, and innovation took off again. Interrupted a little bit by the pandemic because no one didn't really understand what we were supposed to be doing. But then, during the pandemic, and especially after the last few years, we've seen what I can only describe as an extreme explosion of innovation, even bigger than during the dot-com boom. And this is not only in your industry, it is in every industry. It's almost hard to fathom how fast we are innovating right now. Partly, of course, because now the developing world is also innovating on a scale that we never saw before. So instead of sharing from your industry, because you know your industry, I'm going to share with an industry famous for slow innovation, namely food. So I was asked right before the pandemic, 2019, to do a speech for chicken farmers, chicken breeding companies. Can you talk about innovation in the chicken industry? I said, what the hell happens in the chicken industry? But okay, I can do it. I go to this speech and I say to myself, if I'm going to speak about innovation in the meat industry, I should show them the Impossible Burger. And I noticed right outside here, there's a vegan meat conference going on. This whole idea of vegetable meat is going to affect chicken farmers. So I put in this slide. Before the speech, I'm clicking, the day before the conference, I'm clicking through the slides just to rehearse. The CEO sees this slide. The guy who invited me to speak. He says, whoa. FREDRIK, why are you showing this slide about vegetable meat? We are a chicken company. I said, because I want to talk about the change that's happening in the food industry. He said to me, FREDRIK, I invited you here to talk about change, but not this much change. Take the slide out. And he forced me to take the slide out. That was 2019. 6 months after that happened, this happened. Kentucky Fried Chicken launched Chicken McNuggets with no chicken in them. 6 months after the chicken company said, we don't want to hear about this much change. And if you think this is it, because now we are used to this already, but the things that are happening now in, for example, food, is absolutely mind-blowing. I met this company a couple of months ago. It's a Finnish company. They have invented a new way to make food, and listen carefully, from air. You take a little bit of water, a little bit of electricity, you add an enzyme, and you use air. And we can make food that we can live on. We can now make food in the space station forever for our astronauts, or we can feed it for humans. And this is not science fiction. This is on the market. You can buy it in Singapore. Food from air. The speed of innovation that we're seeing right now is like nothing we've ever seen before. Now this means you need what I call idea perception. Idea perception is your ability to see that the world is changing. And most people are terrible at seeing change. I can ask you a rhetorical question. What is the big change that happened in the book industry, my industry, let's say 10 to 15 years ago? We went from books to what? 99% of people will say we went from books to e-books. And that's what we thought. We invested billions of dollars to build e-books and e-readers. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. We were wrong. We didn't see change. We did not have idea perception. Now, what did actually happen? 20 years ago, when did people read books? On the bus, on the subway, on vacation, in bed, on the toilet. What are people doing there now? They are not on e-books. Exactly. We did not go from book. Exactly. We did not go from book to e-book. We went from book to Facebook. Okay? Book to YouTube, book to Twitter. We stopped reading books. 20 years ago, everyone in an airport lounge would be reading a book. Everyone. Today they are on a gadget. I know one of them here is reading a book, but that's only because it's out of battery, okay? We are not reading books anymore. This is my favorite picture, the next one. I took this myself. It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I took it in Singapore. Look at this lady. This is a woman pretending to read a book. But she's not reading a book, and she is not reading an e-book. She is on YouTube. And suddenly, the book just died. And yet, we invested billions of dollars into e-books because we didn't see the actual change. We were talking about the wrong thing. I call this the ununderstood change. In 1995, 96, 97, we were talking about e-books. We should have been talking about apps because that's the change that happened. Ask yourself this yourselves. Don't say AI now. Everyone is talking about AI, and AI is going to change everything. But everyone is talking about AI. AI was the ununderstood change 5 years ago when no one was talking about it. But now we are all talking about it. But 10 years from now, when we look back to 2023, what is the change that will have affected us a lot, but no one is talking about it? Our ununderstood change. Maybe I'll do this. I'll give you just 30 seconds. You have to turn around. You talk to this person and just reflect for like 30 seconds with the other person. What is the one thing we should be talking about in the credit industry that no one is talking about because everyone is talking about AI? Just 30 seconds, just to reflect so you get to talk and think. Just 30 seconds. What is your ununderstood change? And while you think about this, let's go to my first message. This is just setting the scene. Now, the first message of my speech is that I'm not going to talk to you about the latest trends happening in your industry. You know already. And we had a whole day of examples of how this in best practices and AI and all of this. Instead, I'm going to talk about the mindset that you need to have as leaders. Because you see, it's not the person, it's not the company that buys the latest technology that wins. It's not even the company that invents the latest technology that wins. It's the company that has the right mindset of change and innovation that will adopt the right technologies. So I will, at the end of this day, talk about how you can look at your own creativity to become masters of it, in what I can do in 45 minutes. So this is the most common question I get when I interview or talk to leaders in the financial industry. It's not the most common in other industries, but it's the most common in yours. And the question is, what can I do to get my people to become more creative? Maybe because people in finance rank themselves as less creative confident than other industries. And I think that is because people who are drawn to this industry are also more cautious, more professional, more organized, not like advertising people who just want to have fun and invent new things. But we also realize that we need to innovate, so how do we take these people and make them more creative? And there is no magic wand that I can just wave and suddenly everyone becomes creative. But if I have to give you one advice, this is the one I would like to give. And I learned this from this lady, Marie Hallander Larsson. She used to be the chief HR officer of Swedbank, the largest bank in Sweden. I'm from Sweden. And she told me this story when she was recruited into a new company. And she said, okay, I'm the new HR manager. I need to meet my staff. It turns out she has 300 HR managers working under her. This is a big company. She says, I'm going to organize a conference, a 2-day conference. I'm going to invite all my colleagues and I'm going to introduce myself to them. The night before the conference, she has already sent out the invitations. The night before the conference, she wakes up in the middle of the night and she has an epiphany. She wakes up, she goes, wait a minute. Why do companies have conferences? What's the purpose? And she said the main purpose is to meet each other and talk and learn new things from each other. It's not to have someone on the stage just preaching, it's the networking. And I love this conference because there's been so much of the networking. It's planned networking. But Marie Hallander Larsson, she went even further. She woke up, she put up her computer, and she changed the whole theme of the conference. Instead of a 2-day conference with speakers and breaks, she went up on the first day and she said to the group, hello, my name is Marie Hallander Larsson, I'm your new boss. And I realized that why we have conferences is so that we can learn and network from each other. So this is not a 2-day conference anymore. This is now a 1-day conference. And I did that by taking away all the speakers. Here's the new schedule. And she put up this slide. And people looked at her and said, are you out of your mind? What are we going to do? And she says, I don't care. Talk to the people you never have time to talk to about the things you never have time to talk about, and then drink some coffee. So they had a whole day of breaks. At the end of the conference, when they were going home in the buses, she had an evaluation. She said, what do you think about this conference? And everyone said, this is the best conference we've ever had. But that's not the lesson. The lesson here is, what is the message that she was sending to her new colleagues on the very first day at the job? She was sending this message. I'm the kind of person that if I have a crazy idea, I'm going to just do it. Which means you're working for a person who will do crazy ideas. Which means you are now encouraged to do crazy ideas. The answer to the question, how do I get more creative people working for me, is that you do creative things to show them. You're the role model, you go before. So ask yourself this question: what have you done to inspire creativity in your team by you doing something differently? Again, I love this conference because the stage is round. It's an interesting place to speak from, but it changes the dynamic of what the conference is, or the fact that it's silent conference. It's another way. It messes with our brains. It sends the message, it's okay to be different. But that's not enough. Of course, you can be as creative as you can as a leader, but what can you do to help your people become more creative? So this is what I learned from Pamela. She has had different roles in innovation in different financial companies. Right now she's in Wells Fargo. She's been in Asia and America. She's been working with financial innovation for decades. And she summarized in a way that I found very clear the 3 things we need to do to get people to innovate. She said you need to have them look up, look outside, and look inside. What does she mean? Well, the lookup is to get people to stop doing their everyday work. Because when we are busy doing our everyday work, it's very hard to innovate. So get people to just stop, pause, look up and say, wait a minute, what is actually going on? But then, and this is the one I want to focus on, then we need to get them to look outside. And that is where the concept of curiosity comes in. Now, I've interviewed tens of thousands of super duper creative people. I'm not one of them. I'm average creative. But I've interviewed some of the most creative people on the planet. I just recently interviewed the founder of Siri about the future of AI. What do the 0.001% of the most creative people have in common? Apart, different from us. People think that they are risk takers, they're not afraid to make mistakes, and this is true. They have a huge egos, sure. But the number one thing they have, that the rest of us do not have as much, is that they are curious. Curious dad, is that what you say? Now the problem with curious in English, I don't know in Spanish, but in English it's a childish word. Is it in Spanish? Is it a positive word or a negative word? Positive. But in English it's like curiosity kills the cat, curious George. It's not a very professional word. Curiosity is profound. And if you want to do one thing to become more creative, develop your curiosity. So I'm going to share with you a story of the most curious person I have interviewed. And it's this man, Frank Stevenson. If you don't know Frank, you don't like cars, because he is iconic. He is the man who designed the Mini. You know the Mini car? That's him. The Fiat 500, also him. He used to be head at design at Ferrari. And he's the man who built McLaren from scratch. He's a legend. Right now he's designing flying cars. He has a huge confidence. He said to me, I'm the most curious person on the planet. I said, really? Well, tell me how your brain works. Now, when I tell you this story, compare that to how your brain would do it. Because my brain would not do what he did. So this is what happened. Before he started at McLaren, after he left Ferrari, he had 2 weeks vacation. So he went to Bahamas. He checks into the hotel, and behind the receptionist in the hotel hangs a sailfish, a big stuffed sailfish. He sees it and says to the receptionist, what's the story with the fish? Because he's curious. The receptionist says, I don't know. No one has ever asked. 100,000 people have checked into this hotel and no one has ever asked about the fish. But he asks. He learns. He has the owner come out and tell him about the sailfish. And it turns out that the sailfish is the fastest fish in the ocean. It's like the king, the lion of the sea. Super fast. He learns as much as he can. Now he's supposed to go home and start working at McLaren. But on the plane back to England, he has a stopover in Miami. And he says to himself, I didn't learn enough about the sailfish because I didn't see a live sailfish. I only saw a stuffed one. I need to see a live one. So he leaves Miami airport. He goes into the harbor of Miami, hoping maybe if he's lucky to see someone who has a sailfish. And he's so lucky that when he comes in, there's a man there coming in from the sea with the sailfish. He goes up to the man and says, wow, congratulations. How much do you want for the fish? The man says, I don't think you understand how this works. It's very, very hard to catch a sailfish. This is the first one I've ever caught in my life. I'm going to stuff it. I'm going to hang it over my bed. It's not for sale. Frank says, this is America. Everything is for sale. How much do you want for the fish? The guy says, I want $20,000. Frank picks up his credit card that he has just received from McLaren and he buys the fish for $20,000. His CFO calls him up and says, what the hell did you just buy? He says, I bought a fish. He almost got fired on the first day of the job. Then he stuffs the fish up and he paints it in the colors of McLaren. And he hangs it in the design studio to remind the people who work at McLaren to design fast cars, inspired by fast things in nature. Because he saw a fish behind the receptionist on his vacation. It doesn't stop there. Curiosity is the same word in Spanish and in Swedish. It's a Latin word. It has the root from the Latin word cura. Cura means to care. It's the same word. Care, curious, same word. It means this. This which you are curious about is what you care about. Or the other way around. That which you do not care about, you are not curious about. Raise of hands. How many of you have tried ChatGPT for over an hour by yourself on the computer? Raise your hand. Okay. 50%. Those 50% are curious about ChatGPT. That's why you spent an hour playing around with it. The other 50% you're not curious, and that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to be. But that which you are curious about is what you care about, and that is the trigger for elevating your curiosity. I tell you a story. I met my wife in Singapore 13 years ago on a blind date. She comes into the restaurant, stunningly beautiful. She sits down. She starts to talk. She's funny. She's smart. I say to myself, oh my God, this is the woman of my life, the mother of my children. Suddenly, I care about this woman. So I become curious. I start asking questions. How many children are you going to have? First date. She says 3. Boys or girl? 1 boy, 2 girls. Me too. Can you live in Sweden? She goes, yes. Good job. Are you going to hit your children? She's from the Philippines. They hit the children. I'm from Sweden. We don't hit our children. She says, I was hit as a child. I'm not going to hit my children. Perfect. We sat for 5 hours. Why? Because I was curious about her. Why? Because I cared about her. So now we're going to do something that you might find a little bit uncomfortable, but it actually is a powerful exercise. Because after I am done, there's going to be a networking and cocktail party. And you are going to get way much out of that if you approach this cocktail party with a curious mindset. So I want you to play along. I want you to talk to the person next to you and ask curious questions, as if you actually care about this person. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Ask curious questions and curious follow-up questions, and you will notice how much you can learn about one person if you really care in just 1 minute. And then keep that mindset for the cocktail hour. Okay? Ready? Just 1 minute. Pick one, ask curious person to the next, find out how much you can learn. Ready, set, go. Ah, you're not curious. Come on. Okay, that was 1 minute. Now, that was just to get you up. Now keep that for the cocktail party and you will have much more fun. Now back to Frank. The third part of developing creative employees, let them look up, look outside, but then this is the most important part. Have them look inside again. And this is what we normally forget. It's not the people who are always going to all the conferences and always Googling the latest innovation. They are not the most valuable for the company. The most valuable for the company is the one who can pick up those new innovations and also understand how we can incorporate that into our own organization. With the example of Frank, after he put the sailfish on the wall to remind them to do fast cars, Frank then said, let's bring it inside. He said, why is the sailfish so fast? What makes it fast? Let's put it in the wind tunnel. So they put it in the wind tunnel and they realized that the sailfish has tiny bumps on its body that creates a little swirl that makes less of a drag, and that's why it's so fast. So they said, well, maybe we can use that on our cars, and the McLaren now has tiny bumps to make the car ever slightly so faster. Pamela calls this applicationists. It's a made-up word. An applicationist is someone who has the ability to make sense of external inspiration, new innovation, and figure out how to incorporate that into their own organization. And those are the most valuable people, and most companies know very well who the curious are, but they have not identified the people who are good at bringing the innovation back into the company. So find your applicationists. Okay, time to change gear. Now we're going to leave the financial sector and we're going to journey out where you have never been before. We're going to learn about creativity from the places you have not studied it. And I've done it for you. We are going to start in Mongolia. What can we learn about creativity from Mongolia? So I went there for 2 weeks. I lived in the desert with the nomadic people of Mongolia. That man up there is 80 years old and he's still riding a horse. They live like we used to live 10,000 years ago, in tents. I started interviewing him about how they look at life. And he gave me this profound insight. He said, you Westerners, you think nomad means a movement of the body. You think we don't have a home and that we always travel. That's not true. He says, we have a home and we live in the same home for weeks, even months, and we don't travel. But every morning when we wake up, we open up the tent door, we stick our head out, and we say to ourselves, this was the perfect place to live yesterday, but is it the perfect place to live today? And if it's not the perfect place to live today, they tear up the whole village and they move. He said, nomad doesn't mean a movement of the body. It means a movement of the mind. The ability to realize that what we did yesterday was great yesterday, but now the world has changed and we need to change. I call this to move like a Mongolian. Now let's bring it back to business. I'm going to exemplify it with the airline industry and how the airline industry bought a new technology and automated part of their process. The check-in machine. Great invention. But this happened to my brother. He goes up to the machine and the machine says, wrong code. Please try again. He entered the wrong code. He tries again, doesn't work. Tries again, doesn't work. Finally the machine says, wrong code, please contact service staff. We need to help you. There's a lady there. She works for the airlines. He goes up to her and says, excuse me, there's something wrong with my code. The woman, without seeing the code, my brother doesn't show her the code. The woman says, do you have a 1 or a 0 in your code? My brother goes, yes, I have a 1. The lady says, change it to lowercase letter L, because L and 1 look the same. Smart? My brother goes, yes, of course. He goes back, he tries it, it works. His first reaction is, thank God for this lady. His second reaction is, wait a minute, how did she know I had an L? She didn't see the code, how did she know? He goes back to her, excuse me, you didn't see my code and yet you knew I had an L. Let me guess, this happens a lot. The lady goes, oh yes, happens all the time. Then my brother says, then I have an idea. Why don't you call your IT department? Because your code is 9 characters, numbers and letters. That's 32 billion combinations. If you take away all the L's and all the O's, all the 1s and all the 0s, this will never happen again. You still have 15 billion combinations. It will last for 5,000 years. And no one will have the problem I had. Good idea? The lady smiles and says, no, it's okay. I love to help people. Because she thinks that her job is, I help people check in. I check people in. That's my job. And that was her job for 30 years. But now with the new machine, her job is, or people have no problem checking in by themselves. Do you see the difference? It was time to change her mindset. They bought the new technology, but they didn't change the mindset. So the question I want you to reflect on, inspired from the Mongolians, what is the mindset that you had in the credit industry that had served you so well in the last 10, 20, 30, 100 years that you now need to let go on because technology has changed, society has changed? Time to move on. That's what we can learn from Mongolia. And now, we're going to go to North Korea. Are you ready? What on earth can we learn about creativity from North Korea? So I went to North Korea. And I have to do a disclaimer here. I am not supporting the North Korean government. It's a terrible government. It's a dictatorship. It's the worst government on the planet. But I interviewed the people of North Korea. And because people think, oh, they are the least creative people on the planet, they are living in the 15th century, there's nothing we can learn. I went twice because maybe there is something we can learn. And it turns out that there was. Because in North Korea, they look at creativity different from any other country I have been to. They have a saying in North Korea, it goes like this: 1 + 1 is not equal to 2. 1 + 1 equals big one. If you have a piece of clay and you have another piece of clay, you combine the two, you don't have two clay, you have a big clay. And this is how they look at creativity. It's the only country on the planet where they don't think creativity is an individual skill. They think it's a collective skill. When I was in North Korea, I went to the mass games. The mass games are 30,000 children performing, holding up pieces of paper, and then after 10 minutes, out comes thousands and thousands of kids performing like an Olympic opening ceremony. I asked my guide, I said to him, how many people are in this show? He said 50,000 people. I said, no, maybe 20,000, not 50,000. He said, no, it's 50,000 people. It's 20,000 people on the stage, and then 30,000 people, the kids in the background. And that's when I realized that my mindset, my Western mindset, is so focused on the creative genius, the person on the stage, that I forgot about the 30,000 kids in the background. The only industry that works with a collective mindset on creativity, I would say, is the movie industry. At the end of the movie, the name of every single person who worked on this movie, even the caterer, even the driver, is in the listings of the movie. Because movie people know that it's not the creative genius that creates a movie. It's everyone together creates a big one. And I recently saw that Taylor Swift, I know this is a crazy example to use Taylor Swift in a credit conference, but Taylor Swift gave away $100,000 to every truck driver on her American tour as a thank you to say, if I didn't have you as a truck driver, we wouldn't have this performance. But the people who go and watch Taylor Swift, they will give her a standing ovation and they don't care about the truck driver. Corporate innovation is the same. Yes, we should highlight and celebrate the innovators, but we should also highlight and celebrate all the people who help the innovators to innovate. When I'm done in 12 minutes, you're going to give me an applaud because it's part of how a conference works. But when you do this, I want you to turn around and look that way, because over there is a woman who's a translator. And translators never get an applaud, ever. They're not even acknowledged, but they are as big part of this speech as I am. So when you give me an applaud, you look there, you give her an applaud. That's what we learn about creativity from North Korea. One more country. Now we're going to go to China. So I used to live in China. And people outside China say there's nothing we can learn about creativity from China. China's people, they don't innovate. Chinese people only copy. And to be clear, this is very true. You can buy a fake BMW in China. This is my favorite example from China. It's a fake city. They built a city for 30,000 people, which is a copy of a Swedish town. They went to Europe and looked at really old cities, like in England and Austria and Switzerland. And then they came to Sweden, and we have this gorgeous city called Sigtuna, looks just like this. And the Chinese said, this is the one. And they built an exact replica. Every house is like it is in Sigtuna. Every tree is where the tree would be in Sigtuna. There's even a church. They're not Christians, but they build a church. They copy the town. Now you look at this and you say, Chinese people, they don't know how to innovate. There's nothing we can learn from them. But actually, when you study creativity, you realize that everyone copies. Pablo Picasso said, good artists copy, great artists steal. It is impossible to create anything without copying something. Steve Jobs, Apple. Apple went to Xerox and saw the graphical interface, they saw the mouse, they saw the touchscreen, and they stole it. Everyone copies. As the previous keynote speaker said, every idea is an iteration of an already existing idea. There has never been a new idea in the history of mankind. The definition of an idea is that you take already existing things and rearrange them in a way you haven't seen before. For example, like this is the formula. An idea equals that a person, you, takes your knowledge and your information and then you combine it in a way you haven't seen before. I'll give you an example. We take the concept of statues, which is a previously known thing, and we take the concept of power lines, which is a previously known thing. Now we take statues and power lines, we combine the two, what do we get? Now you're thinking Eiffel Tower, electrocution, a statue with lamps on it. I don't care what you're thinking, but you're thinking something. But every idea is a combination of something. The iPhone is a computer and a telephone combined. The trick is how you combine. This is what they're doing in Iceland. They take statues and power lines, they combine them, they get power lines looking like statues. A beautiful idea, a creative solution, but technically just power lines and statues combined. Which brings us back to China. Because suddenly we realize that they are masters of creativity because they copy, not despite they copy. When I lived in China, I met this wonderful creative young woman. Her name was Amelia. Super creative young woman. And she said to me, Fredrik, you Westerners, you are obsessed with creativity. That's all you talk about. You talk about intellectual property. Yeah, so she said. You talk about patents. Who cares? You talk about copyright. And she said, Fredrik, creativity is not about copyright. Creativity is about copying right. And I think this is a brilliant definition. Not copying straight off, but copying right. And we, outside China, we look at China, we talk about the Chinese Google and the Chinese Twitter and the Chinese Facebook, like they're copies of American companies. When the Chinese Twitter and the Chinese Google are way more advanced than Google and Twitter and Facebook. Why? Because they copied it and they copied right. When I lived in Singapore, which has a similar mindset, Singapore Airport has been voted the best airport in the world 25 years in a row. And I worked with Singapore Airport. When they built the airport, they went around the world and looked at all the best airports. Charles de Gaulle, Heathrow, Schiphol, JFK. At that time, the best airports in the world. And they took a little bit from JFK, a little bit from Heathrow, a little bit from Schiphol, a little bit from Charles de Gaulle, and they built Singapore Airport. Best airport in the world. When I was there, I asked Singapore Airport, when is the last time Charles de Gaulle came and visited you? Because Charles de Gaulle is a terrible airport right now. JFK is a terrible airport. Heathrow sucks. But why? Because they think they are the best in the world and they stopped copying. We should copy more, but we should copy right. So that was from China. So now I'm going to end, and I thought I should end with some inspiration from Mexico. So I don't just fly in here to do a speech. I also go and interview people when I'm here, creative people, and I've interviewed so many creative people, gallerists, artists, hotelier, different chefs. And I interviewed this man, which I'm sure you know, has been voted one of the top 50 restaurants in the world for like 10 years in a row. I think they are number 9 in the world today. But he is famous, or he and the restaurant is famous for doing traditional Mexican food with a twist. And I asked him about the balance. How do you balance doing what you're supposed to be doing with doing something that is new and innovative? There is some kind of oxymoron here. And he said, yes, I never thought about it, but he said, my approach is this. It's about surprisingly familiar. He said, I will take a cactus and I will cook it so that you have that familiar taste of what you want a cactus to taste like, but then I make it into an ice cream, and that is the surprise. So the balance between the familiar, you will not like food that you are not familiar with, but you get bored with something that doesn't surprise you. So the surprisingly familiar approach of this chef and other Mexican chefs being proud of the Mexican food, changing a little bit to make it interesting and surprising, not going crazy, is what we can learn, what I learned from this trip in Mexico. And I think it's perfect for you. Because advertising or art or other creative industries, even tech, you can go crazy. But in your industry, there is a built-in conflict between creativity and safety. If you lose the trust and the security from your customers, you're gone. So you need to balance the familiarity of what I'm expecting from a financial service and then add the surprisingness. And this is what the iPhone did so well. The iPhone did not pretend to be a telephone. The iPhone took the interface from the computer and transferred it into a telephone, and suddenly it felt somehow familiar, and yet we were surprised by the feeling that we got. Surprisingly familiarity. And I'm going to end by showing you an example from a long time ago when someone did exactly this. This is 1989. 30 years ago almost. It's the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, why did I pick an example that is so old? Because we look at 1989 now as a time of when everything wasn't changing so much. But actually, 1989, at least in Europe, was earth-shattering. The communist bloc fell apart, the Berlin Wall fell, suddenly democracy in Europe, Germany became one, and no one saw it coming just 6 months earlier. In 6 months, it just fell apart. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. So suddenly, I think it was October, the wall people started hacking on the wall. Now every newspaper said to them, photographers, oh my God, we need to send a photographer to Berlin, quickly, something is happening. And they all sent one photographer each. And they all went to the same place. Everyone went to West Berlin. Everyone went to Brandenburger Tor, and everyone took a picture of the people hacking on the wall. It's a great picture. Now here's the problem. Everyone took the same picture. Hundreds of thousands of pictures, all the same. Which made them boring. Everyone but one. A Swedish photographer, actually. He didn't go to West Berlin. He went to Mexico City. No, I'm just kidding. That would be stupid. No. He went to Berlin. He went to West Berlin, just like everyone else, and he took a picture like this, just like everyone else. But then he said, wait a minute, I'm going to do what everyone else is doing, but I'm going to do it with a twist. So he went 50 meters further, and he went to East Berlin. And he was the only man who did. And he took this picture. See the hand coming in? Peace, brother. There's 100,000 pictures from this side. There's one picture from this side. Take a guess. Which one was voted best picture in Europe in 1990? Obviously this one. Why? Because it is showing what we expected to see, but from an unexpected place. I want you to remember this picture when you remember this speech. I don't want you to be Elon Musk. I don't want you to be Salvador Dali. I don't want you to go crazy. I want you to do what everyone else is doing and then do it with a twist, because the effect can be huge. Human creativity is the human superpower. Nothing creates more value than a person who creates a new idea. So I encourage you to develop the creativity of yourself, of your teams, of your organizations, and come up with ideas that are surprisingly familiar. Good luck with that. Thank you very much.